I remember I was terrified to flip the private to public button on GitHub. It turns out that if you just switch a repo to public on GitHub and you're some tiny startup that no one's ever heard of, people don't find it. Literally nothing happened until we went out, got boots on the ground and really started pushing and talking about it to draw attention to it. No one even discovered the repo on their own. We shouldn't have been worried about that. The response we got seemed pretty positive. The next step was okay, how do we build, an infrastructure service for this and get it launched as quickly as possible? My name is Christine Spang, and I'm the founder and CTO at Nihilus.
This is Code Story, a podcast bringing you interviews with tech visionaries who share in the critical moments of what it takes to change an industry and build and lead a team that has your back. I'm your host, Noah Lappart, and today how Christine Spang created the Communications API so you can unlock the power of your comms data. All this and more on Code Story. According to Christine Spang, she is secretly Canadian, being born in Toronto. Early on in life, she moved to Upstate New York and grew up there. She came from a family of engineers and entrepreneurs. After getting into an RPG game based on Lord of the Rings, she had to learn to code, run Linux, and fell in love with software. In high school, she was a band geek and was super into fantasy reading. These days, she tends to focus more on hobbies that get her out and moving in the world, specifically rock climbing and plants. Christine was working for a startup that ended up being sold to Oracle. At that point, she was considering what was next for her. And the timing was fortuitous, as her friend from MIT was starting up something around extracting information from email. This is the creation story of Nihilus.
Nihilus is a software platform that makes it easy for developers to build apps that can connect to communications data and to help people drive action from the insights from that communications data. In its simplest form, this can mean that folks can use our APIs to bring communications data into other tools so that people don't have to context switch all the time to get things done. We also work with companies to do higher level things, to essentially sort through and filter that communications data, to structure or to extract structured information from that communications data. For example, one of the channels that we connect to is email, and there's all sorts of really useful and interesting things in email that, other software might want to take actions on. So we can extract real-time order information from a mailbox and provide that in a nice, easy-to-consume form that other apps can use to essentially make their experience better by knowing what kinds of things people are buying, or use it to do, real-time notifications about packages and things like that. So that's just an example of, a use case where, we're able to take that communications data and help apps build things that make use of it. When you think of it at a high level, all sorts of work today is essentially knowledge work. People get things done by collaborating and communicating with other people. So Nihilus essentially helps connect the data that's generated through all of this communication to software. And software is a lever. Software is a way to make people more productive. And we're kind of the translation layer that makes this communication data is something that machines can help us action. So I went to university at MIT. One of the people that I met was the original person that I started the company with, and essentially the idea sparked from his undergraduate thesis. He wanted to essentially build a customized email client that layered on metadata about who you were talking to. He started trying to build this email client and just found that the basic technology, the basic sort of plumbing of getting access to that data and working with it ended up being way more difficult than he expected it to be. This was 2012-ish, and even then kind of the expectations of a developer was that most data you can access through some sort of REST API. That wasn't the case at all for email. You had to use this old protocol called IMAP. The learning curve was really big. Just doing basic things was really difficult. And the takeaway from this was that, maybe the reason that, despite the fact that email as a communications channel had even then been around for like 40 plus years, been growing a ton year over year, and had kind of become this like basic infrastructure of the internet, that maybe people weren't building apps that connected to that information and helped make use of it because just the barrier to development and to entry was too high. So I guess I would say that, the company idea started with this problem around email. And then once we sort of got started building, essentially my friend graduated from MIT and I was working at this other startup at the time and kind of went through like a whole startup life cycle. I joined the company when it was independent. We grew the company for a while. The founders ended up selling the company to Oracle. Honestly, I felt working at, a huge older company to be pretty constraining. I started thinking about what I was going to do next, and the timing lined up really well to just dive into this wild idea with this friend of mine from MIT. It was a natural transition point in my life. Just decided to, throw in all the cards. I moved to, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley is kind of like this hub of startups. It was a place that, if I looked back from me as like a old lady on her deathbed, I would regret not having gone to check out a place that really seemed like the center of the software universe at the time. And so, I packed up all my stuff into boxes and shipped it across the country and just sort of showed up at my friend's doorstep. He was already living here at the time, and got started on this idea.
Let's dive into the MVP then, that first version of the product. How long did it take to build, and what sort of tools did you use to bring it to life?
I would say that the first few sort of iterations of ideas, we probably ended up throwing those away completely. When we really got started and sort of coalesced around this idea of essentially building an API wrapper first around all of the different email providers so that you could build an app that quickly and easily could connect to a mailbox and do things with the data in that mailbox, no matter what email provider that user was on, whether it was Google, whether it was Microsoft, whether it was Yahoo. All of those different mailbox providers use like a completely different protocol. And so we decided first we are going to integrate with Google the open source mailbox protocol that is called IMAP. And at the time when we were getting started building, this was early 2014, those actually used the same protocol. This was before Google launched a REST API for Gmail. And so we decided to build an integration with that protocol that exposed a nice modern REST semantics API for connecting to those mailbox. And then we would try to get developers out there to build apps that connected to that data and did things, essentially building productivity tools on top of mailboxes. The question that you should always have when you're starting a company is, does anybody want what it is that I want to build? You essentially want to optimize for discovering whether or not there's a market and demand for the thing that you're trying to build. Our strategy was, a couple different things. One is we scoped down kind of the MVP to be, we're just going to build out the IMAP protocol. And then what we chose to do was two things. One was that we launched that first integration as like a really minimal open source app, but it wasn't something that you could really run in production. And the way that we sort of got the word out and tried to get some feedback was that my friend had essentially run this startup talk series at MIT. So he had some connections into, startup media and press. We worked with that media to essentially put out some articles, to get on Hacker News, things like that, to get an article in TechCrunch, about the APIs that we were building around email, to expose our thesis to the world that people would build a lot more tools that connected to email if it were easier to work with, and to see if that made sense to other people. I remember I was terrified to flip the private to public button on GitHub. And we did that before we put out any press or posted it anywhere. And it turns out that If you just switch a repo to public on GitHub and you're like some tiny startup that no one's ever heard of, people don't find it. Like literally nothing happened after we made it public. Until we went out, got boots on the ground and like really started pushing and talking about it to draw attention to it. No one even discovered the repo on their own. We should have been worried about that. The response we got seemed pretty positive. People resonated with the idea. And so then, the next step was like, okay, how do we build, an infrastructure service for this and get it launched as quickly as possible? We chose to build things out using Python as a programming language just to iterate super fast. We're still in the stage where we need to figure out, what the product looked like. And, there's more to getting product market fit than, getting some early feedback of like, oh yeah, that's an interesting idea. I have that problem. Second step is like, okay, you need to build a product that can solve that problem and, figure out the right form of that. And then there's a lot of other, things you need to figure out along the way to having like a production ready product that people will pay for. We tried to get to a launch point as quickly as possible, but we decided that in order to have that MVP, we needed to have support not only for Google and sort of the open protocol IMAP mailboxes, but we also needed to have support from Microsoft. We were researching like the different protocols that you had to implement to do Microsoft, and we decided that to have maximum compatibility with all the different accounts out there, there's lots of on-premise Exchange servers. If we were going to eventually move to more enterprise type of audiences, we need to have really broad support on that side. So we built out like a reverse engineered protocol implementation of this protocol called Exchange ActiveSync. This is a long time ago at this point, so I feel like I can freely say that like our V1 of that implementation did not really work at all. But we managed to launch the early platform, and luckily most folks would test using Google accounts first. So we kind of got away with like saying we have support from Microsoft, but it not really being very good. At that point, it was like we had to get people to actually build on the platform and use it in order to continue iterating. We were in the Bay Area. We, tried to find startups and companies that could even come to our office and work on building to get people using the platform. And I think it was, in terms of how long it took, we launched the open source version in like June of 2014, and then we launched the hosted platform in October. And then I think we didn't really get our first paying customer until about January. So I would say it was about a year end to end from when we put down the first few lines of code to like a paying customer. But obviously there were lots of little milestones in between that 12-month period.
So you kind of touched on a few of these on the way, but I want to dive into them a little bit. Tell me about the decisions and trade-offs you had to make, whether it be around, the protocols you had to support, the Microsoft stuff that you had to support. Tell me about some of those decisions you had to make in the early days and how you coped with them.
One of the biggest challenges was, the fact that like a REST style of API that a web developer expected had very different semantics. We didn't want to compromise on the API design. We wanted it to be as simple as possible. We wanted it to be responsive, be something that was intuitive to use for like a modern web developer. We weren't really sure whether or not we could sort of like hot fetch the data, translating from, some API request that had, a certain expectation of what data it was going to return. One thing that we had to decide was, are we going to proxy these API requests? And, when someone connects to our API, on the fly, make a call back out to, Google or whoever on the back end and fetch the data and return it? Or should we make some sort of like asynchronous process that essentially created a cache of data on our end that we could then use to serve the API? The advantage of doing this sort of proxy pattern was that it would be a lot cheaper to build. But the downside was that we might have been constrained in terms of like how powerful we could make the APIs, and then also it would be a lot slower because, there's more points of failure and there's more work that had to be done within a single API request in order to return that data. we decided to make an asynchronous process that actually cached the data on our platform that would then serve to the users. This had a lot of implications down the line. I think it was like a fine decision in terms of like getting the MVP out the door. We cached the entire mailbox data instead of, making it configurable or, having some sort of complex fallback. This wasn't something that was like optimal in terms of like cost scaling or a lot of operational constraints, but the simplest possible way at the time to really focus on the API design. So that was like a pretty major decision around trade-offs that we made early on in the day. That was pretty significant.
This episode is sponsored by Vanta. You're a startup founder. Finding product market fit is probably your number one priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. And obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors. But they take time and energy pulling you away from building and shipping. And that's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups like yours get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. How, you ask? Vanta automates the manual security tasks that slow you down, helping you streamline your audit. And the platform connects you with trusted VCSOs to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. Join over 8,000 companies, including many Y Combinator and Techstars startups who trust Vanta. Simplify compliance and get $1,000 off at vanta.com/codestory. That's VANTA.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by Kinsta. Between juggling client meetings, managing your website, and keeping up with everyday tasks, who has the time to stress out about website security? Well, with Kinsta, the technical stuff is taken care of, so you can focus on what you do best. Kinsta provides managed hosting for WordPress, offering lightning-fast load times, top-tier security, and unmatched human-only customer support. Whether you're a business owner, web developer, or running a digital agency, Kinsta makes managing your website easy and efficient. Kinsta provides enterprise-grade security, being one of the few hosting providers for WordPress with SOC 2 and other certifications, guaranteeing the highest level of security for your website. Thanks to their unlimited free expert-led migrations, Kinsta ensures a smooth transition for you from other hosting providers. Customers have reported 200% faster load times post-migration to their platform. What I find cool about Kinsta is their fast and reliable customer service and premium features that are included at no extra cost. Ready to experience Kinsta's hosting for yourself? Get your first month free when you sign up at kinsta.com today. That's KINSTA.com. You've got your MVP then. How did you progress the product from there and mature it? And I think what I'm most interested in, or kind of wrap that question in a box, is how you built your roadmap, how you decided, okay, this is the next most important thing to build.
This was really an iterative process that came out of interacting with a lot of the early folks that were building on top of the platform. A lot of folks in the early days, what they were trying to do is essentially bring email data into their application so that they could, build tools on top of that, whether they're, automating outreach or, surfacing up potential different actions that you might want to do depending on, what kind of communication you got back, and doing that all without switching back and forth between your mailbox and, whatever app you were using to get things done. As a part of working through with these early folks who were building on the platform, we not only got to see what they were trying to accomplish today, but we could ask questions about what other problems that they were trying to solve. Pretty soon this surfaced up a lot of common patterns. One big thing was that people wanted to schedule meetings as well and to interact with calendars and to look at that data and bring that into their applications as well. And that was a kind of a natural iteration and expansion of the product. We essentially built out a calendar and scheduling API and just launched it side by side alongside the email integration. So went from just email to email and calendars. The kind of overarching vision in the early days was that we didn't want to just build out this infrastructure and sell that. That was something that we focused on a lot more after a few years. In the early days, we actually wanted to build our own sort of customized email client that, essentially could be really extensible, could have, all of these extensions that would integrate other products into it. And so we built the API infrastructure as like a step one to getting there. There's this kind of multiple different things that were happening. One is that we were selling the infrastructure and we were getting feedback from the people that were building this infrastructure. Two is that we also hired a couple application engineers who were building internally stuff on top of the APIs, working towards this full-fledged email client. And they ran into problems like, how do we do contact, autocomplete when you're, composing an email? And so that's what led us to add a support for connecting to address books. Email, calendars, and contacts were kind of like the trifecta of sort of baseline data types that we integrated with for a number of years. And the internal email client that we were building ended up being a very bad product direction for us to go into. So eventually we shut that down and sort of spun it off as an open source product and just really focused on the infrastructure, which was not only growing and thriving, but just had some really core metrics that were really positive that made us feel really confident in just sort of betting the future of the business on it. So from there, in terms of iterating on the product, it's again really goes back to that interaction with customers and having a lot of conversations with folks that were using the product for different things. And as a platform, the way that we've come to think about what do we build is, one, what are table stakes things that a lot of our customers are trying to build that we could make much easier for them to build and get to market more quickly by providing, APIs that are specific to getting that thing done. Some early examples are doing link tracking in emails. If they wanted to provide a great experience for those customers, they had to provide it. So we tried to see the patterns and get the feedback about what of those things could we offload from our customers' plates and put onto ours, and just make it much easier for people to launch the things that they were trying to launch. And we found that a lot of people had to spend a lot of time building the front end part of, say you're trying to embed a scheduling workflow into your app, and you want to show a calendar view, you want to show slots that someone can book a meeting instantly. All of that stuff is, maybe it's not rocket science to build, but it takes time and it takes expensive engineers, and we're the scheduling experts here. Can we actually just provide a pre-integrated component that people can customize and embed into their product that takes this work off their plate? That's what led us to launch our scheduling app. Today we have a whole bunch of different components that you can just drop into your application to add a schedule view or an email composer. None of these ideas really come from us, meditating in a corner and trying to think of what can we nihilists bestow upon the world as our gift to humanity. It's really about asking people and observing what people are trying to do and asking ourselves how we can help them.
Let's switch to team. So how did you go about building your team? And what did you look for in those people to indicate they were the winning horses to join you?
In the early days of starting the company, the early team, me and my co-founder, we just went out and pitched literally every single one of our smartest friends on joining the company because we were pretty young. I was 24 when I started this company, and joining a 3-person company is seems like a pretty risky trade-off. We found that having some sort of connection to the people was pretty important for getting people to kind of take the leap, especially in the early days when we had only raised a little bit of money. We couldn't pay anywhere near market salaries. And I think one of the advantages of having gone through school at MIT was that, we knew all these really sharp engineers, and, your 20s is also a really great time to do something that may seem risky just because it seems like it would be fun. So that's really how we hired in the early days. Today, I'm super excited and proud of the fact that like literally every single person we hire is more experienced and better than, myself and the early team at, whatever it is that they're being hired to do. And that's a really amazing place to be. And it's one of the most exciting things about scaling and, seeing success, getting that product market fit, getting great investors to back the company is that like we're going out and hiring a VP of sales, chief marketing officer, things like that. And then, I get to learn from all of those people, about how do we be world-class at X. So, I think there's a lot of different things that we look for when we're hiring core components of our culture that wouldn't really say that we look for culture fit, more of like what is this person gonna add to the company? We have a really collaborative company. We win and lose as a team. I really want people to feel that way and to lead that way. We, think it's really important to have like a merit-based advancement. People should succeed according to their contribution, not because of whatever they look like or their gender or race, things like that. And so we really look for values alignment there. Everyone we hire is a builder in some way. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're an engineer, cranking out code. Operations is building out, the infrastructure for running the company. Like, we all need to be running off of the same data. We need to build, lightweight process that allows us to align and scale. People are building teams. So there's all sorts of building and creating, and we look for folks that are really excited to do that because it's not an easy thing to do to be at a startup, and it can be stressful, it can be chaotic, and it's really important to set expectations with folks about what they're getting into. When you do find the right person, they can move super fast and grow a lot. I'm really proud of the fact that, for example, we have, I think, 3 VPs at Nihilist now today who joined early on in their careers, in some cases entry-level roles, and have grown with the company by focusing on that impact and what they can do. That's something that's super exciting and meaningful for me.
So let's flip to scalability a little bit. So did you build this to scale efficiently from day one, or have you been fighting this as you've grown?
If there's people out there that built to scale from day one, I want to meet them, because I think for 99% of people, that's not how it works. Building for scalability is hard, and it takes a long time. The first version of our product absolutely would not handle the scale that we're at today. And one rule of thumb that I use is that every 10x amount of traffic that you put on a product, there's some part of it you're probably going to have to just completely replace and rewrite. Constraints change. People might be using your product in a different way. There might be different components that become the bottlenecks. For example, I think in the early days, Slack chose to scale their product by sharding or splitting up the traffic by team. And that worked great for a while, but eventually, their business changed. They started selling to larger companies, more enterprise type businesses, which is a natural progression that often happens in SaaS businesses. But, they ended up having teams that didn't fit on a single shard, and the performance was really bad for them. But I don't think that Slack did it wrong to have chosen that particular pattern for, where their product was in the early days versus trying to predict way into the future what things might look like. A certain architecture should get you through, at least a couple of years, hopefully. I guess if you're growing really fast, you might just be in this constant treadmill of rewriting things all over the time. I'm sure my team today kind of feels like it's just endless migrations, replacing components and rewriting things. But yeah, we've been going through a big platform transition over the past year or so, and we're still in the middle of upgrading a lot of the different systems. You have more resources to build things in different ways once you get a certain amount of traction. And so I don't want to build something that's going to last, 5 years or 10 years at this company. We don't know what the company's going to need then. We don't know what the customers are going to look like. We don't know how they're going to be using the product in that amount of time. Our goal is to get us through the next 5 to 10x of traffic scale that will just get us to the point where we can take a look at things again and see what's changed and what we have to do differently now.
So with the platform transformation you're going through right now, what sort of architecture is it towards? Is it microservice? Is it mini monoliths? Is it, everybody's got their own flavor, right? But what do you choose?
So we started out building everything in Python, and it started out kind of as a monolith, but eventually we wanted to have different services that were essentially scaled separately. Things kind of evolved towards what I've heard jokingly called a distributed monolith over time, which is all of the downsides of distributed systems, but, sort of in the shape or pretending that it's still a monolith, and that, we have had the same code repo. We sort of had a lot of shared code between different services, but different services were talking to the same databases and things like that. A big part of this platform transition has been to go through and work on decoupling things into services that are more loosely coupled. You might call it a microservices architecture. And I think people have a lot of different opinions on what's the right sort of size and scope of different services, but the main thing is how do you separate the interactions of the different services? We've also been moving from Python as our primary language to Golang. I don't think it was at all the wrong decision to start out using Python. We may have never have made it to this point in time if we hadn't been able to iterate quickly and really take advantage of, Python's huge array of developer libraries and things you can just drop in to connect to, different data types and APIs and things like that. Today we're operating at a scale where we just need a new level of performance, and we found that doing a ground-up rewrite for some of our core components using Golang just really gave us a ton more performance and allowed us to make the product a lot cheaper.
Well, Christine, as you step out on the balcony and you look across all that you've built, what are you most proud of?
The thing that comes to mind most quickly is the team. The thing that makes the most difference over time, if you're thinking about building companies that really make an impact on the world, they have to have a sustained output and a sustained innovation over decades. And the foundation to that is really building a team and a culture that creates an environment where people can do their best work. I'm really proud of the fact that our executive team today is a mix of both people that we've brought in with really great extensive experience building products, teams elsewhere, but also long-term Nihilus sort of OG folks who've been with the team for years at this point. In many cases, they started as individual contributors on the team, and today are VPs running entire teams and parts of the company. That's the thing that motivates me to come to work every day. Having that connection to people that are doing great work, and it's a thing that will enable us to keep building great products over the course of the years to come.
I hear most often that from builders, from founders, that they are most proud of the team, that they find the most rewarding thing is the culture that they've built. And I never get tired of hearing it and relate to it personally. So let's flip the script a little bit. So tell me about a mistake you made and how you and your team responded to it.
A kind of interesting story I wanted to share is that the original name of this company was not Nihilus. It was actually Inbox. Because in the beginning, we were building, an API that helped people access mail data, and we were also building an email client, which didn't end up working well as a business, and we eventually stopped working on. But we chose this name Inbox because it was very focused on this sort of email data access and accessing your mailbox and doing things with it. At a certain point in time, Google released a new mobile app that was an email client called Inbox. And so we had to change the name of the company. Luckily, this was only 2 years in or something like that. So we had to go through, all of our code base and change the name everywhere, change the domain. And we implement an OAuth flow for folks that are connecting accounts to our platform to make their data available through the platform. And so it involves a series of redirects that kind of go between our site that's implementing the flow as well as someone's domain. And so they have to redirect to our URL and then we redirect back. And so we needed to make sure that the flow didn't break as we were moving to the new domain. We tested this all, the first time around, and the first time we flipped the switch live, of course we broke a bunch of different apps. We had to quickly go in there and patch that on the fly and work with these early customers to make sure that their apps were working properly. 2 months later, we found that people couldn't really pronounce the name of the company with the spelling that we had chosen for Nihilist. It was actually Nihilist with an I at first. And so we decided on the fly to change the spelling of Nihilist to sub the I for a Y, and so we had to do this whole thing over again. And I'm very proud to say that the second time around, we didn't break anything. The big lessons from this are, one, you're gonna break things. You don't want your team to operate with a degree of fear of breaking things, especially early on in the days, You're working with people who are building software themselves. They know, mistakes happen. And the important things are, one, do the right thing, fix the problem as fast as you can, get in front of customers who are having problems, make sure that you're really responsive and are owning the mistake and the fix all the way through, and then learn from it. Otherwise, obviously you're not getting better over time. And I really come back to thinking about that a lot, in that companies can ossify over time if you overreact to making mistakes and sort of drive out any sort of risk-taking. And especially for engineering, being able to take calculated risks to move quickly is oxygen to making change happen. And it's obviously a delicate balance, and the stakes grow larger as you have more people depending on the platform. But hopefully you also have more resources to implement better testing systems that allow you to keep moving fast. Just want to make sure that the team owns it, solves it, and learns from it. At the end of the day, those are the big things that matter.
So what does the future look like for Nihilist, the product, and for your team?
At the highest level, what Nihilist, the platform, enables is that we connect to data from different communication channels, and we help people drive action from the information in those communications. People all over the world, everywhere, talk to each other to get things done. I really feel like we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg in terms of, what kinds of channels that we can connect to and what kinds of actions that we can help drive from all of the insights in this communication data. A big trend that obviously we're really involved in is artificial intelligence and the ability to take unstructured text and both structure it, but also, I think in the future, the way that we're thinking about how do we drive value for people is, we should be helping them build things that they're trying to build much more quickly than they could do it on their own. We have sort of a pyramid of needs, number one, connectivity to all these different channels and normalization across, different email providers, different calendar providers, things like that. Nobody wants to have to go and read 5,000 different manuals in order to get, whatever they're trying to do done. So, we take care of that and, provide great documentation and guides for people to build what they're trying to build. A layer on top of that is pattern matching amongst what people are trying to get done and thinking about what kinds of additional building blocks can we provide for them that help them get that done faster, whether that's an API that abstracts away something that people are trying to do that makes it so that they only have to call one API versus calling 5 different ones in sequence. Sometimes that's front-end code that comes pre-integrated that they can customize and drop into their app. Maybe that's sample code dedicated to getting people off the ground with certain use cases that a lot of people are trying to build that would just help to have a scaffold to build off of. It's so much easier to take something and edit it than to start from the ground up and have to have a blank page and put the first words on it. Those are kind of things that are happening today, as well as kind of data abstractions, things like advanced filtering to help people drill down into, what communication data is relevant to them. That's also code that people have to write on their end if they don't have a platform like Nihilus, and it can be quite complicated. There can be a lot of infrastructure for doing that, especially in real time. So there's like these data abstractions and building blocks as well. The far future, I think we're going to see a lot more innovation in how people write code that will also apply to Nihilus. Like, imagine in the future, someone can write in prose a description of what they're trying to do, and we can provide tools that will just generate, the code for the workflow that they're trying to automate. There's also kind of the UI-based, low-code, no-code type things where, people provide tools that allow you to drag and drop and sort of visually define the business logic for whatever you're trying to do. And I think the broad overall trend in the industry is that as software is powering more and more different things, more and more people need to be enabled with the leverage and empowerment that software provides, and they need to be able to do that with both less specialized training, but also, even the people that write code every day for a living can become more effective by having tools that reduce the amount of work that they have to do. And we see this already today with, the engineer who uses GitHub Copilot to write a third of the code that they need to write for work, and, just uses that as a jumping off point. We're going to see an order of magnitude in terms of the development of that kind of stuff as we go through the next 5 years and beyond.
Well, let's switch to you, Christine. Who influences the way that you work? Name a person that you look up to and why.
A lot of people talk about famous people in these kinds of questions, but all I can think of is people that I have direct relationships with that have had huge positive impacts on me and that I learn from on a regular basis. So for example, my co-founder, Gleb, is a huge influence. We're very different people, very complementary in a lot of ways. He's a sales CEO and I'm a technical co-founder, and we've raised a number of rounds of funding together at this point, and I first learned the concept of a talk track from him. So you try to iterate on it and measure sort of, how people are responding or what's engaging and what's not. This sounds maybe really silly, but I was a huge nerd growing up. I went to MIT, not known for people with amazing people skills. Being able to see this live and just learn by example has been really meaningful for me. And relationships are one of the biggest drivers of human behavior. And so having a relationship that's supportive both ways, that we're both learning from each other, is something that's hugely important for me. I've also had a lot of coaches throughout the years of building this business. I think this is something that is underutilized when it comes to doing stuff that's really hard. And entrepreneurship is really hard. If you think about professional athletes, every player out on the field has, a coach, they have, personal trainers, maybe they have nutritionist support, all these people that are going behind the scenes that are helping make that person successful. The same thing is true if, you're in a high pressure role where you need to grow really quickly. Having professional support can be super helpful. So I've had, I think 3 different management and executive coaches at this point. They've all been hugely influential on learning more about myself and using that to be more effective in my role, because you need self-awareness. You need to know what energizes you, what doesn't, how to show up your best. There's a lot of skills around bringing so many people together to accomplish a bigger goal that are really tough. You see all sorts of wild human behavior when you're in a position of leadership in a fast-growing organization, and it's very confusing at times. So if you've never been in that situation before, and so I think it's really important to have that support network and trusted folks that maybe it's coaches. There's also a lot of advisors that had at the company that can give perspective and help you figure out the right thing to do.
We talked about a mistake earlier, but a little bit different spin. Maybe if you could go back to the beginning, what would you do differently, or where would you consider taking a different approach?
We're almost in year 9 of Nihilist when I got this started. And I could say that if I were starting this company today, I would definitely do a lot of things really differently. I have a much larger network today than I did back then. We probably spent the first 4 years of the company in this kind of, there's a phase of starting a company where you haven't found product market fit yet. And it's kind of like a random walk of experiments where you don't really know what's working and what's not working, and you just have to try a lot of things and try to figure out what resonates. I think we did a really good job at scaling back and scaling down the basics of how do we get feedback as fast as possible on whether this idea is good, with trying to validate without having a full-fledged product by engaging with the developer community, doing press, things like that. And we did a good job at bringing folks in to help them build on the early product. But I do think that we sort of got stuck in this position of chasing something that really wasn't working for a long time. And definitely, if I had to do it again, I have a much better sense now as to how to take a step back and gauge is this working? Is this not working? When should we bring in management help? What are the things that I'm good at? And what are the things that I'm not good at that I should just hire someone to do instead? For example, I found that I really don't thrive managing a really large team. I'm totally fine and cool managing a small team of maybe up to half a dozen folks. Just the way that my brain works is I like to have a small group of people that I interact with a lot, but it's very challenging for me to work with just a huge amount of people on an everyday basis. So engaging, going out and finding complementary people earlier on to, people that are really excited about doing those things that are not my skill set or my strength. It's definitely something that I would do differently if I were doing this again.
So last question, Christine. So you're getting on a plane, you're sitting next to a young entrepreneur who's built the next big thing. Maybe they're another 24-year-old just like you, and they can't wait to show you what they've built right there on the plane. What advice do you give that person, having gone down this road a bit?
Showing up is half the battle. If you just refuse to quit, you're eventually going to figure out something that works. But you have to keep trying.
That's great advice. I love it. Direct and solid. Well, Christine, thank you for being on the show today, and thank you for telling the creation story of Nihilist.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
And this concludes another chapter of Code Story. Code Story is hosted and produced by Noah Labhart. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting app of your choice. Support the show on patreon.com/codestory for just $5 to $10 a month. And when you get a chance, leave us a review. Both things help us out tremendously. And thanks again for listening.
Now Taxes is 100% free when you file in the TurboTax app if you didn't file with us last year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, just do your own taxes in the app by 2/18.
What if I have lots of forms?
All good, all 100% free.
What if I had 3 jobs?
Still 100% free.
What if I once saw Bigfoot?
That has nothing to do with taxes, so still 100% free.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Now this is Taxes. See if you qualify in the TurboTax app. Excludes TurboTax Live. Must start and file in app by 2/18.